was different. I was growing up. My best friend who lived across the street is a little white kid named Tommy. We hung out with each other all the time. But I knew that I was different. One year, Tommy's mom took me and Tommy to the mall to go see Santa Claus. And we waited in line for an hour. And finally, it was our turn. And Tommy went first, and Santa said, "What do you want for Christmas, little boy?" And Tommy said, "Let me have a bike." And Santa said, "No problem." Then it was my turn. And that's when I knew I was different. Because I sat on Santa Claus's lap, and Santa said, "What do you want for Christmas, little boy?" And I looked at him with my little Palestinian eyes, and I said, "Enforcement of UN Resolution 194, allowing us to return."
He's a funny guy. Amer Zahr is an adjunct professor of law, he's an activist, and he's also a stand-up comedian, as you saw there. Palestinian-American. There's a lot to talk about. Up next on the InnerView, Amer Zahr joins us. Amer, good to have you on the InnerView. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a testing time for many Palestinians, and you know, in terms of what you do, there's a lot of material, but there's also not much to joke about. And in that space, what do you do as an activist, as a comedian? How do you express yourself?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. Comedy is a form of protest. Comedy is a way that we tell our story. One of the many ways that we as Palestinians for the last 75 years have tried to tell our story. And comedy, sometimes people say to me, "Imran, you know, you're a comedian, I never know if you're joking." I tell them, I'm never joking. I'm a comedian. I use humor to tell the truth. And that's the way I look at my art form and how it ties into Palestine all the time. In fact, the tour that I'm currently doing and the show that I'm currently doing is called The Truth. And it was called that before October 7th, and of course it's changed a lot since then. But truth is the basis of all comedy. And as Palestinians, we know we have the truth with us, so that means there's a place for comedy to point out the hypocrisy, to point out the ridiculousness of everything that's happening. And so while it's not a time maybe to laugh in a joyful way, it is a time to laugh at the ridiculousness of what happens to us and the world, how the world handles it and sees it.
When you call out the hypocrisy, particularly in your context, is it mainly related to power and the politicians? And no matter which administration it might be, Republican or Democrat, this feeling that for as long as we can remember, there's always been an inherent bias or hypocrisy against the Palestinians.
Yeah, you know, Ahmed Ahmed, one of the foremost Arab-American comedians, he told me when I first started, he said, in comedy, you punch up, okay? And that's what a comedian does, yes. Punches at power, at those who are wielding the strength against the weak. That's why some of the most famous comedians and the ones that will go down in history in America are African-American, because they're talking about their experiences. Richard Pryor, Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock. The Palestinian comedy tradition is kind of the same. We are talking about those who are wielding that power against us because, again, comedy is a form of protest. It's an opposition to those things. So yes, comedy is always about punching up and hitting those in power. You never punch down, that's bullying, and anybody can do that. Comedy is different. Comedy is how we are telling our story in the face of power that wields against us in the most violent and terrible ways.
Are those your idols then, the Chappelles and the Pryors? Do you, not only in terms of the inspiration, but like from a technical point of view, in terms of how you construct your storytelling and get to your punchline and have your pivot and all of that, are those the types of people who you study?
Well, from a technical point of view, I think everyone has to find their own voice. I mean, there's certain ways, obviously, to build a joke in a story and do callbacks and all that kind of stuff. But those are my inspirations from a substantive point of view. From I want to communicate my point of view of the world through humor. That's what they were doing. I want to tell the story of my people through humor. That's what they were doing. And so yes, they're my idols and what I look to as models from that point of view. And there's other comedians too who are just talking about society, and maybe it's not as personal, like Carlin or Bill Burr, white comedians who do it. It's a lot harder to do it as a white comedian. I mean, I think like white male comedian is the hardest job in the world because there's nothing to talk about. Your life's pretty easy. So they got to find stuff to talk about. But we see that a lot. Look, think about it. If you went to a comedy show and there was a white comedian on stage for an hour and he never talked about being white, that would be okay with you. You don't expect him to talk about it. But if you went to a comedy show for a black comedian for an hour and he or she never talked about being black, you would feel like you were not getting the whole story. You feel like you're missing out on something, because a comedy show is like a relationship with, it's like when I start a show, I know that I'm starting with the audience a relationship, and I have to immediately pretend like they've known me and I've known them for 20 years. So I'm spilling my deepest, darkest secrets right away. I'm being very open and honest and transparent. And the audience expects that, and they expect to hear that. And because race is such a constant in every part of the world, we know that that plays a role in everyone's life, especially non-white people around the world, and especially non-white people in America, Europe, and what they call the West. So it is something that is deeply sort of in the eyes of the audience. The audience expects this sort of authenticity from the comedian, and that's what creates this deep relationship and this deep connection when it happens. And this is why, for instance, the comedian is the writer, the director, the producer. I mean, if you heard your favorite singer sing and you realize later that she didn't write the words or the melody, that would be okay with you. But if you watched your favorite comedian perform for an hour and you learned later on that they didn't write the jokes or the direction of the show or anything like that, you would feel like you were cheated. We expect something different from the comedian. We expect to hear something new from the comedian. I mean, you might go to a concert for your favorite singer and be okay that they're singing songs from 30 years ago. But if I go to a comedy show and you saw me 2 years ago and I start telling jokes you heard before, you'll get upset. I mean, I wish I was a singer. A singer can come out with like one song and sing it for 30 years. That's a pretty good career, you know? We have to come up with new stuff all the time. And I'm not complaining, but that just pushes our art form. And that's what the best comedians do. And so I'm very honored to be part of this art form, and I'm always pushing myself further and further.
I'm looking forward to the day that somebody is exposed, the Milli Vanilli of comedy. I mean, it won't be you, but it might be quite funny. You have a lot of strings to your bow. You trained as a lawyer, you studied as a lawyer, you're an adjunct professor. I watched an interview that you posted on your YouTube channel of you on Bill Maher's show from like more than 20 years ago. You had a bit more hair than you currently do.
That's right.
And you were not a comedian then. I mean, you was, I don't know, a law student, right? And you were ganged up on. It was fascinating. I mean, post 9/11, there was a lot of trauma there. They were getting you to sort of defend why suicide bombers want 72 virgins, and then it was really weird. It was like a time capsule. But in that sense, I mean, so you were out there. At what point did you decide that you wanted to do more comedy? At what point did you sort of integrate the comedic aspect with your legal training and everything else?
Yeah. I mean, first, the funny thing is, if you watch shows, whether it's me or someone else debating about Palestine 20 years ago, even 30 years ago, even 40 years ago, the Zionists are using the exact same attack lines that they use. I mean, they haven't really matured. I mean, they haven't figured out that this stuff doesn't work yet. It's really a sign of, well, they have no idea what's going on. They never have. So I was in law school in 2003, I would say, and there was an Arab student group at the University of Michigan bringing in a comedian, and they kind of put out an email and said, hey, does anyone want to sort of try something on stage? They kind of, I think they just needed to fill time on stage before the real comedian came up. And I said, sure, I'll try it. So I went up. I told a couple jokes about my dad. I really didn't know what I was doing, and everybody laughed. And I said, wow, this is pretty cool. You know, you have this. I mean, who wouldn't like a job or an art form where you go up there and the rules are you get to talk and 200, 300, 400, 500, 1,000 people need to sit there and be quiet and listen. I mean, those are the rules. And it was pretty cool. And so if you do well, it can be a great feeling and a great way to tell a story. So when I finished up law school, and when I graduated, I said, let me try this comedy thing. And if I fail, I'll go be a lawyer. And I started doing shows. I live in Detroit, Michigan, where I have a huge Arab community. I'm about to sneeze. 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. I live in Detroit, Michigan. I live in Detroit, Michigan, the city of Dearborn, which has the largest Arab community anywhere. And so what I would do is I would call up Arab organizations. I would say, hey, you need a comedian? You want a comedian? Anywhere from like Cleveland to Chicago that I could drive to, I would call them up. And I did that, and my name got to be a little known in the community, and then somebody gave me $100, then $200, and the first time I got $500, I said, I'm going to be a millionaire. This is a great job. And luckily, it's been successful now to the point where I go to Palestine. I return to Palestine and do shows all the time. A comedy festival in Palestine that I started in 2015, where I bring comedians from around the world and perform there. And now when I walk around Arab American communities, or especially when I'm walking in the streets of Jerusalem and somebody stops me and says, hey, man, we love you. Thanks for doing what you do. That's all the reward I would ever need. I don't know if you know this, but being a Palestinian comedian who criticizes Israel means like the doors of Hollywood might not be as open to you as they might be to other people. But I would trade everything in Hollywood for one person in Palestine walking up to me and saying, hey, man, we love you. And we happen to live in a world where if you're a Palestinian artist, you probably can't have the authentic love of your people and the authentic love of Hollywood at the same time. And that's okay. And that's okay, because when people ask me why I do what I do and what drives me, I say, I just want my people to name something after me one day when I die. And that's all that matters to me. Do my people enjoy and appreciate what I'm doing? And I've been very lucky so far.
Your family's from Jaffa, if I'm not mistaken, right?
My father was born in Jaffa because his mother's from Jaffa. My father's dad is from Nazareth, and my mother's mother is from Nazareth, and my mother's father is from Akka. So I'm from all over Palestine, but my father was born in Jaffa because his mother is there. And when he was 1 month old, they were ethnically cleansed in 1948, and he ended up in Jordan.
How important is it to you, or is it for you, to give the history and the context while trying to make people laugh? Giving the reality of the historical situation and the historical dispossession threaded through your storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. The whole point is to tell the Palestinian story through art. And we have a long history of that, whether it's singing or poetry. Comedy is just another vehicle to do that. And so it is important to tell those things because here, look, the reality is this: Palestinians, if I'm telling the Palestinian story, then I should be authentic to the way we tell it. When a Palestinian meets another Palestinian, the first thing we do is we ask each other, what city or village are you from? Because we know there's a story to it. And based on where it is, we can immediately learn a lot about the history of that person. And because we live in a world where the Palestinians, a Palestinian's number one job every day is to prove that he or she exists. That's why I wrote that being Palestinian is relentless. It is a relentless pursuit of proving our own humanity every day. And just when we think things are getting better, we saw after October 7th, it was very easy for everyone to re-employ all these attacks against us. Palestinians don't exist. I mean, when you start an argument with Palestinians don't exist, there was never a Palestine, it's very hard to get to the substance of anything quickly, because now you're basically saying I don't exist. And we see this as the Zionist sort of framework for a long time, and they lie. And so we have to spend a lot of time correcting the record. And lying is part of their strategy, right? I mean, they know exactly what they're doing. So we have to always prove our existence and disprove the myths. I mean, every country has their myths, but Israel's are really special, and America's are really special too. That's why they get along so much. I mean, they're both built on this idea that there was no one here before we got here, and we made something out of nothing. And of course, that's why, my biggest video probably that I ever made was something that I made in 2020 called Achaduha Mafrushi, which means fully furnished. They took it fully furnished, which is a saying from my mom. And it's a way of us reclaiming our history. I mean, they say they came to a people without a land. They say they made the desert bloom. No, the desert was blooming. It was blooming with Palestinian Arabs for centuries. And we need to retell and reclaim that history. That doesn't just go back to 1948. It doesn't just go back to 1,000 years ago. It goes back to 3,000 years ago. Palestine has never been empty. And so we Palestinians today are the descendants of everyone who has come through that land, including the Israelites, the Hebrews, 2,000 years ago. But this idea of Zionism, Zionism says Jews are from Palestine. Yeah, they are. Nobody denies that. Nobody who's read a book could ever deny that. But the problem with Zionism, it says Jews are from Palestine and no one else is. They're the only ones that are. The Jews that are in Europe are the only ones that are from Palestine, and the Palestinians who live in Palestine for thousands of years, they're from somewhere else. And so, hey, if that's not a basis for comedy, I don't know what else is.
Was Palestine the reason you chose to be a Bernie Sanders surrogate when he was running for president? Was he the one candidate you thought gets it?
Well, Palestine is at the center of any activism I do on presidential campaign levels, because we live in a system where the president has basically carte blanche over foreign policy. Presidents actually have much less power over domestic policy than they do over foreign policy. So Bernie changed the conversation. Bernie never went as far as we wanted him to, but when you have a presidential candidate saying that we need to condition aid to Israel based on their adherence to international law, that's a fundamental change in the conversation. And when he comes with a coalition built on other issues as well, and we can bring that issue in, there's a real opportunity for us. And so, yes, it was because of Palestine. And we saw what I always knew to be the truth, that Palestine is the issue that unites the whole Arab American community when they vote. Bernie Sanders against Hillary Clinton and against Joe Biden in the primaries that he ran against them got something like 80%, 90% of the Arab American vote when he ran against them. And that wasn't because of $15 an hour or environmental justice. Not that we don't believe in those things, but those weren't the things that drove our people to the polls. It was Palestine. And that's why our people are going to go to the polls in larger numbers this year than ever, because Palestine is on the ballot even more clearly than it ever was before. And it used to be a top issue. This year, it's the only issue we're voting on. And so, and that's still the case, even with the withdrawal of Joe Biden. And so I know that there's going to be that energy with us, that people want to go and make their voices heard. And I think this is going to be a historic year for Arab Americans at the polling stations. And so we have a real sort of spirit among us as Arab Americans that Palestine unites us when the time comes for that. And we saw that after October 7th. I mean, Arab Americans became a big, with all our dysfunction, we became a pretty big united family that came together after October 7th. And that hasn't changed. It's been like that for 9 months, and it's not going to change.
My brother is a Manchester United fan, and when Liverpool were playing Manchester City to win the Premier League championship, and he was asked who he wanted to win, he said, well, it's pork versus ham for him, right? As a practicing Muslim. And I noticed that you made the same analogy 4 years ago when it came to Biden versus Trump. So let's switch up Biden. because he's now dropped out. Kamala Harris versus Trump, is it pork versus ham for you? I mean, kind of help me understand, what is a principled vote, what is a tactical vote, or is it just much of a muchness?
Yeah, I mean, so once Biden withdrew, there was a little change in the Arab American community. So when Biden was in the race, it was defeat Biden at all costs. He has to be punished. Democratic Party has to be punished. He must lose, and we'll gain power out of that. When he left and you got Harris, now I think people are in like a waiting phase. Let's see what happens for a couple weeks. Her meeting with Netanyahu, there were some very bad parts of it, and there were some nice words that came out of it. But this genocide has really matured us. It's turned us into a community that's no longer going to be happy with the crumbs that we've received before. And so cute words about liking us and loving hummus and saying salamu alaikum when you come into our communities, that's not going to work anymore. We fell for that in 2020. And so we are going to be asking for real policy changes. And so those demands have not changed just because Harris is now the nominee. Yeah, Trump's bad. We understand how bad he is. No one understands how bad he is more than Arab Americans. So we get it. We get it. But there still could be an avenue. There still could be a strategy in this election that the Democrats need to lose in order for them to make the changes we need them to make, especially if Kamala Harris picks Josh Shapiro, who cracked down on protests during the student protest times, who has been a very loudly open Zionist supporter of Israel. That could be a non-starter as well, and it seems that that's the direction she's going. And she's already been a huge supporter of Israel along the way. And so we'll have to wait and see what happens in the next couple months or next couple weeks. But the election is still 3 months away. There's a lot of time. I don't think a lot of people are going to make up their mind till the end of October or so, which is normal in American elections. So we'll see. Things have changed. And make no mistake, Biden's withdrawal was directly related to his position on Palestine and Israel and how that broke down his coalition. Yeah, the Democrats will tell you it's because he didn't look good on TV, but he just didn't have the coalition he had anymore. He was going to lose Michigan and a lot of other places. So there's a chance for them to come back from that now. But I'm not optimistic. Listen, I've been working in the Democratic Party for decades. I'm not optimistic that they're going to change. It might be, and we know as Arab Americans, the only place for us in this terrible two-party system might be the Democratic Party. It might be the only way for them to change is for there to be such a movement that more parties emerge, and that might have to come from a terrible defeat. And so I think you're going to see a lot of people. Right now, I support Jill Stein, and I think you're going to see a lot of people supporting Jill Stein and the Green Party as a way to fight back against this system that we're in. So we're going to see a lot of things in this election.
Yeah, I mean, they used to say it about Ralph Nader. I take it you don't care that much for those people who say a vote for Jill Stein is effectively handing the presidency to Trump. Do you care much about that?
Well, that's a very arrogant, entitled point of view, because first of all, it assumes that everyone who might vote for Jill Stein would have otherwise voted for Kamala Harris.
Right.
And I don't know why there's any reason to believe that. I mean, there might be some people that vote for Jill Stein that might have otherwise voted for Donald Trump, but I think the vast majority of people who are going to vote for Jill Stein might have otherwise voted for nobody. So the Democrats have this real sense of entitlement that the left, the real left, belongs to them. And that's not true at all. The real left in America sees the Democrats as a corporate party, just like the Republicans. And we understand that. I mean, the Republicans and Democrats are like Coke and Pepsi, right? I mean, if you might prefer Coke, but if you walk into a restaurant and you ask for a Coke and they say, we only have Pepsi, 90% of people say, okay, give me the Pepsi. Because they really just, they really just want a cola with fizz. So we understand that. But this sense of entitlement that the Democrats have, well, you have to vote for us. Well, no, your policies are just as imperial and as damaging to our people. I mean, Joe Biden, as a Democrat in office, is the absolute worst person we could have had, way worse than Donald Trump after October 7th, because he's an ideologically committed Zionist imperialist who's also a Democrat. So the Democrats don't stand up and speak out against him. And that was very damaging. I live in a state of Michigan with a Democratic governor and 2 Democratic senators. If Donald Trump was president on October 7th, they would have called for a ceasefire in November. But because it was their guy, they still haven't done it, and it's August.
Yeah.
Because Joe Biden was president in this moment, Democrats didn't speak up. And so we had a situation where a pro-Palestinian congressman like Jamal Bowman was ousted from his congressional seat by his own party. If Donald Trump were president, Jamal Bowman might have been the Democratic nominee for president this year, because the Democratic Party would have taken on the mantle of anti-Trump, and that means pro-ceasefire, anti-war. So Joe Biden was the absolute worst person we could have had in this moment.
Yeah.
And maybe the Democrats need to learn a lesson from all of that.
Yeah. Amer, I've got to go. Unfortunately, we have to wrap, but it's been a pleasure.
No, this is the Arab part of the conversation where like you have to go.
Listen,
I pretend like I want you to stay, sleep over.
I'm gonna get some tea and kanafa, and we'll continue.
Yeah. No, stay, sleep on. This is the part where we lie to each other.
Yeah.
We say you can stay over even though it's late. No, listen, man, I'm honored to be with you, and thank you for doing what you do. And let's keep talking about the truth in Palestine every single day.
Wish you all the best. Amer Zahr. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.